The first sign that someone is watching you is rarely a person. It is a pattern. That thought crossed my mind before sunrise as I poured a cup of coffee and looked across the eastern pasture, where a thin layer of morning fog drifted over the grass. The air smelled of fresh hay, damp soil, and cedar from the tree line separating my property from the neighboring subdivision. My farm had been quiet for nearly 15 years. The cattle followed the same routine every morning, the irrigation system activated before daylight, and the security cameras quietly recorded everything from the front entrance to the equipment barn without demanding my attention. Most days I never reviewed the footage because nothing unusual ever happened. That changed on a cool Tuesday morning when my phone displayed a motion alert from the camera mounted near the north fence. I opened the live feed expecting to see a wandering deer or one of my neighbors driving past the county road. Instead, I watched a white sport utility vehicle marked with the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association security logo slowly pull onto the gravel shoulder outside my fence. The driver did not continue down the road. He stopped. The engine remained running while another man stepped out carrying a clipboard and binoculars. He faced my property for nearly 4 minutes without crossing the fence line or speaking to anyone. Then he pointed toward my equipment shed, wrote several notes, returned to the vehicle, and drove away. I replayed the recording twice before setting my coffee on the kitchen counter. My first reaction was confusion rather than anger because my farm was not inside Willow Ridge. It never had been. My property sat outside the subdivision boundaries by nearly half a mile and shared nothing with the neighborhood except the same county road leading toward town. I had never signed their governing documents, never attended one of their meetings, and never paid a single association fee. Their rules ended exactly where my property began. I spent the rest of the morning repairing a section of livestock fencing while the question stayed in the back of my mind. Around noon, another motion alert appeared. The same vehicle returned. This time it parked beside the opposite fence near the western pasture. The passenger walked slowly along the public shoulder while looking through the fence toward my barns and storage buildings. Once again, the entire visit lasted only a few minutes before the vehicle disappeared toward the subdivision entrance. That evening, I reviewed every camera connected to my farm security system. For different cameras had captured the same vehicle from different angles. Each recording carried the exact time, date, and location. Every camera told the same story. I enlarged one frame until the Willow Ridge security emblem became perfectly readable on the vehicle door. The license plate appeared clearly beneath the morning sunlight, and the driver wore a dark security uniform displaying the same community logo stitched above the shirt pocket. None of it looked accidental. Before going to bed, I searched the previous week's recordings. The vehicle appeared again, then again, then again, always during daylight. Always stopping outside my fences, always remaining on the public shoulder while observing my property. The visits followed such a consistent schedule that they almost resembled inspections. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the quiet ticking of the kitchen clock, while another camera notification quietly appeared across my phone screen. The same white sport utility vehicle had just returned for the 5th time in 8 days. Watching the live video, I realized something that made the entire situation even stranger than before. Whoever ordered those visits seemed completely comfortable documenting a farm owned by someone who did not even belong to their homeowners association. Early the next morning, I carried my coffee onto the back porch just as the eastern sky shifted from deep blue to pale gold. The farm always seemed to wake up one sound at a time. Wind moved gently through the rows of oak trees bordering the southern pasture. The automatic irrigation system released a soft rhythmic spray across the vegetable fields. Cattle wandered slowly toward the feeding area while a pair of red-tailed hawks circled high above the property. For most people, it probably looked like an ordinary farm, but nearly every acre quietly relied on technology working behind the scenes. Years earlier, I had installed a network of high-definition security cameras after several expensive pieces of equipment disappeared from neighboring farms during a series of thefts across the county. The cameras covered every entrance, every barn, every storage building, every livestock pasture, and each section of fencing bordering the county road. Motion sensors activated recordings automatically, while the entire system stored encrypted copies both on local drives and secure cloud servers. Solar-powered cameras watched remote fence lines where electrical service had never been installed, and GPS trackers monitored expensive tractors, trailers, and utility equipment whenever they left the property. None of it existed because I expected trouble. It existed because farms depend on preparation long before problems appear. That same philosophy guided nearly everything I did. My name is Ethan Carter, and my family had worked this land for 3 generations. My grandfather cleared much of the original acreage with equipment that would seem primitive by modern standards, while my father gradually expanded the operation into one of the most productive family farms in the county. When I eventually took over, I embraced technology without abandoning tradition. Drones helped monitor crop conditions. Soil sensors measured moisture levels throughout the growing season. Weather stations transmitted real-time information directly to my phone. Every improvement served one purpose. Better information leads to better decisions. That principle had never failed me. Around mid-morning, I drove the utility vehicle toward the north pasture where one of the cameras had recorded the white security vehicle the previous day. The gravel lane followed the fence line, separating my property from the county road before turning toward a large equipment barn built decades before Willow Ridge even existed. Standing beside the fence, I looked toward the subdivision entrance visible in the distance. Decorative stone walls, manicured landscaping, and neatly aligned mailboxes marked the beginning of their neighborhood. My farm remained completely outside those boundaries. County survey markers placed years earlier clearly identified where my property began, and recorded plats stored in the courthouse established the same boundaries in permanent public records. There had never been confusion about ownership. The fence did not separate my farm from the homeowners association by accident. It separated 2 entirely different properties governed by 2 entirely different sets of rules. Later that afternoon, another motion alert appeared while I repaired a section of fencing near the western field. The same white sport utility vehicle stopped outside the property once again. This time I watched the live camera feed instead of walking toward the road. The passenger stepped out carrying the same clipboard before slowly studying my barns through binoculars. He never crossed onto my land. He never attempted conversation. He simply observed, wrote several notes, returned to the vehicle, and left exactly 6 minutes later. That consistency interested me more than the visit itself. Random curiosity rarely follows identical schedules. Organized activity usually does. Before sunset, I exported every recording into a separate evidence folder, preserving the original timestamps exactly as the cameras created them. As the files finished transferring onto an external drive, one simple question continued echoing through my mind. If my farm had absolutely no connection to Willow Ridge, who had instructed their security team to spend so much time watching it? The 4th appearance happened on Friday morning at exactly 9:14 according to the camera timestamp, and by then I had stopped believing in coincidence. I watched the live feed from my office inside the equipment barn while the same white sport utility vehicle slowed along the county road before pulling onto the gravel shoulder outside my north fence. The driver remained behind the wheel exactly as he had every previous visit. The passenger stepped out carrying the familiar clipboard, binoculars, and a tablet computer. Instead of scanning the entire property, he walked directly toward the same section of fence where he had stopped twice before. That detail caught my attention immediately because people acting out of casual curiosity rarely repeat identical routines. He raised the binoculars toward my livestock barn, lowered them, entered several notes into the tablet, then turned toward the grain storage building before photographing it with what appeared to be a company-issued phone. Every movement looked practiced rather than spontaneous. I quietly opened recordings from earlier in the week and placed them beside the live video on a second monitor. The similarities were impossible to ignore. The vehicle parked in nearly the same location every time. The passenger followed almost the same walking path beside the public shoulder. He paused for nearly identical amounts of time while facing the same structures before returning to the vehicle. Even the departure followed the same direction back toward the Willow Ridge entrance. I exported another copy of the recording and created a spreadsheet documenting every visit with the exact arrival time, departure time, weather conditions, camera location, and visible activity. By lunchtime, the timeline contained enough information to reveal something I had not noticed before. Every visit occurred on weekdays between 9 o'clock and noon. None happened during evenings or weekends. Whatever those employees were doing appeared to be part of an organized work schedule rather than personal curiosity. That afternoon, I drove into town to purchase fencing supplies from a local agricultural supplier. On the way home, I passed the entrance to Willow Ridge and noticed the same white security vehicle parked beside the association office. The logo on the door matched every recording stored inside my evidence folder. I continued driving without stopping because I still had more questions than answers, and I preferred collecting facts before asking anyone for explanations. Back at the farm, I reviewed additional footage from cameras overlooking the southern pasture, where another angle captured the county road beyond the tree line. The security vehicle appeared there as well, confirming that every approach and departure had been recorded from multiple directions. The overlapping camera views established an uninterrupted timeline showing exactly where the vehicle remained at every moment it was visible near my property. I smiled quietly as another realization settled in. My security system had never been installed to watch other people. It existed to protect my farm. Yet without anyone intending it, the cameras had created something far more valuable than ordinary surveillance. They had independently documented every visit from beginning to end using synchronized timestamps that could be verified across multiple recording devices. As the evening sun settled behind the western hills, I closed the final video file and looked once more across the peaceful fields stretching toward the county road. Whoever believed they could quietly observe my farm without leaving a record had underestimated the one thing every modern farm quietly produces every single day. Reliable data never becomes emotional, never forgets details, and never changes its story once the truth has been recorded. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies, crisp autumn air, and a steady breeze carrying the scent of freshly cut hay across the northern fields. I decided it was time to stop wondering and begin organizing every piece of information my farm had quietly collected during the previous 2 weeks. Inside the small office overlooking the equipment barn, I connected the external drive containing every camera recording to my desktop computer and opened a fresh project folder labeled only with the current date. One by one, I copied the original video files without making any edits, preserving the embedded timestamps, camera identification numbers, and system metadata exactly as they had been recorded. I knew from years of managing construction projects that original records always carried more weight than edited copies. After finishing the transfer, I synchronized the footage from every camera onto a single timeline. For separate viewpoints captured each visit from different angles, while the synchronized timestamps confirmed that every recording matched within fractions of a second. The north entrance camera documented the vehicle arriving from the direction of Willow Ridge. The western pasture camera captured the passenger walking beside the county road while looking toward my barns. Another camera near the grain storage building recorded the same vehicle, leaving several minutes later. Even the remote solar-powered camera overlooking the southern fence line confirmed the departure route every single time. The pattern was remarkably consistent. I opened the GPS history recorded by my farm management software and overlaid the camera timestamps onto an aerial property map. Although the security vehicle remained on the public shoulder throughout every visit, its stopping locations followed nearly identical coordinates during each appearance. The passenger consistently faced the same buildings, paused at nearly the same locations, and remained for almost identical lengths of time before returning to the vehicle. Nothing suggested random observation. Everything suggested a routine. Next, I exported still images from every visit, selecting frames where the association security logo, vehicle license plate, uniforms, binoculars, clipboard, and tablet computer appeared most clearly beneath natural daylight. Each file received a descriptive name, exact timestamp, camera location, and corresponding spreadsheet reference. I added weather conditions from my farm weather station because the recordings showed bright skies and excellent visibility during every visit. No environmental factor could explain repeated stops caused by poor driving conditions or unexpected traffic. During the afternoon, I reviewed the automated access logs generated by the security system itself. Every motion alert, recording activation, file creation, and backup process had been preserved automatically by the software without manual intervention. That independent digital record strengthened the credibility of the footage because the system documented its own operation alongside the video itself. Before sunset, I printed a county property map showing my farm boundaries, neighboring parcels, the public roadway, and the entrance to Willow Ridge. I placed the map beside the timeline, photographs, and spreadsheet before quietly stepping outside onto the porch. Across the fields, everything looked exactly as it always had. The fences stood where they had for years. The barns reflected the warm orange light of the setting sun. Cattle grazed peacefully while birds settled into the trees bordering the county road. Nothing about the landscape suggested conflict. Yet inside my office, an entirely different picture had begun to emerge. Every camera, every timestamp, every GPS coordinate, every weather record, and every automated system log pointed toward the same conclusion. My farm had not simply observed unusual activity. It had quietly documented a complete and verifiable history. And for the first time, I realized I no longer needed assumptions. I had something far more reliable. I had evidence that could speak for itself. Monday morning began with the quiet confidence that comes from finally having enough information to ask the right questions instead of making guesses. I drove into the county seat carrying a single organized binder containing printed photographs, synchronized camera timelines, GPS location maps, weather records, and copies of every security log generated by my farm during the previous 2 weeks. The courthouse had become familiar over the years because farming often required recorded deeds, easements, tax records, and survey information. I greeted the clerk by name before requesting certified copies of the most recent parcel maps covering both my farm and the neighboring Willow Ridge subdivision. A few minutes later, the large plats lay across the public counter beneath bright overhead lights. Every boundary matched the copies already stored inside my office. My farm remained completely outside the subdivision, separated by clearly recorded property lines and the county roadway. There were no shared parcels, no overlapping easements, and no recorded authority granting the homeowners association responsibility beyond its own neighborhood boundaries. I thanked the clerk before visiting the county planning office where archived subdivision approvals and engineering drawings were maintained. The planning technician located the original development documents for Willow Ridge and carefully reviewed the recorded boundary exhibits with me. Once again, the conclusion remained exactly the same. The subdivision ended well before reaching my property. Nothing inside the official records suggested that association security possessed any responsibility for monitoring activity outside those established limits. Before leaving the building, I purchased certified copies of the relevant maps and placed them beside the timeline already prepared from my camera system. Driving back toward the farm, I realized every independent source continued pointing toward the same conclusion without contradicting a single earlier observation. That afternoon, I sat inside my office overlooking the western pasture and compared the certified plats against the spreadsheet documenting every security visit. The stopping locations all occurred beside public roadway segments directly bordering my farm rather than anywhere inside Willow Ridge. I highlighted each location on an aerial photograph before matching the corresponding camera footage to the exact coordinates. The pattern became even clearer once everything appeared together on a single page. The visits followed an organized route beginning at the subdivision entrance, continuing along my northern fence, stopping beside the western pasture, and returning through the same neighborhood gate. Every movement repeated with remarkable consistency. Curious about one remaining question, I downloaded the publicly available governing documents published by the association and carefully read each section discussing community security responsibilities. The language focused entirely on common areas, neighborhood amenities, association property, and residents within Willow Ridge. I found nothing extending routine security observation onto privately owned farms outside the development. That absence proved just as important as every document I had already collected. By sunset, the binder resting on my desk contained certified property records, official subdivision maps, governing documents, synchronized camera evidence, GPS overlays, weather reports, and automated security logs, all organized into chronological order. Looking across the quiet fields glowing beneath the fading evening light, I understood that the strongest evidence rarely comes from one dramatic discovery. It comes from dozens of independent facts quietly supporting one another until the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Whatever explanation eventually emerged, it would have to stand beside every one of those records, because none of them had changed their story from the very beginning. Tuesday morning arrived with a clear sky and cool autumn air drifting across the fields as I drove toward the Willow Ridge Community Office carrying the same binder that had grown steadily thicker during the previous week. Inside were certified county plats, subdivision boundary maps, printed security camera photographs, synchronized timestamps, GPS overlays, weather records, and copies of the publicly available association documents. Every page had been organized in chronological order because I wanted the facts to explain themselves without unnecessary emotion. The association office occupied a well-maintained brick building overlooking the neighborhood entrance, surrounded by carefully trimmed hedges and colorful flower beds that reflected the same attention to detail visible throughout the subdivision. After introducing myself to the receptionist, I politely requested a meeting with Rebecca Collins regarding a matter involving the association security department. A few minutes later, she welcomed me into a conference room where large neighborhood maps covered one wall beside framed photographs of community events and architectural improvement projects. She greeted me professionally and invited me to explain why I had come. I thanked her for meeting with me before placing the binder on the conference table and opening it to the first page. Instead of beginning with opinions, I began with a simple aerial map showing my farm, the county roadway, and the recorded boundary of Willow Ridge. Rebecca studied the map quietly while I explained that my property had never been included within the association. She nodded, acknowledging that she recognized the general location of my farm. I then turned to the next section containing synchronized camera images showing the association security vehicle parked outside my fence on multiple weekdays. Each photograph displayed the exact timestamp, camera identification number, and visible location. Rebecca leaned forward and examined the pictures carefully without interrupting. I continued turning pages, revealing the spreadsheet documenting every visit, the GPS overlays identifying each stopping location, and the certified county records confirming that every observation occurred outside association property. The room remained remarkably quiet except for the sound of paper turning across the polished conference table. After several minutes, Rebecca finally asked whether every photograph had been captured by the same security system. I explained that multiple cameras recorded each visit simultaneously from different angles, while automated backups preserved the original files without modification. She requested to see the corresponding video clips, so I opened my laptop and played several synchronized recordings side by side. The vehicle appeared exactly where the photographs indicated, arriving from the subdivision entrance, stopping beside my fence, remaining for several minutes while the passenger observed my barns through binoculars, and returning to Willow Ridge. Rebecca watched each recording without speaking. When the final clip ended, she quietly looked back toward the certified county map resting beside the computer. "Your property is not part of our association," she said thoughtfully. "That is correct," I replied. She slowly closed the binder before asking one final question. "Would you allow me time to review this information with our security contractor and the board before we reach any conclusions?" I nodded immediately because that request sounded reasonable. I had not come seeking an argument. I had come seeking an explanation supported by facts. As I gathered my laptop and stepped outside into the warm afternoon sunlight, I realized the conversation had accomplished something important. For the first time since the white security vehicle appeared outside my farm, the discussion had moved away from assumptions and toward documented evidence. And once facts are placed plainly on the table, they become very difficult for anyone to overlook. 3 days passed before my phone rang, just after 8 o'clock on a quiet Friday morning. Rebecca Collins asked whether I could return to the Willow Ridge Community Office because the board had completed its review of the material I had provided earlier that week. Her voice sounded professional, measured, and noticeably different from our first conversation. There was no defensiveness, only a request to continue discussing the documented facts. I arrived shortly before 9 carrying the same binder, although I suspected I would not need to open it very often. Inside the conference room sat Rebecca, 2 board members, the association manager, and the supervisor responsible for the neighborhood security contractor. A large county parcel map had already been placed across the conference table before I entered. That single detail immediately told me the meeting would focus on records rather than opinions. Rebecca welcomed me, thanked me for returning, and explained that the board had independently verified the certified plats, subdivision boundaries, and public records through county offices after our previous meeting. She then turned toward the security supervisor and asked him to explain the patrol activity recorded outside my farm. He cleared his throat before opening a folder containing internal route sheets used by the security company. According to those documents, the patrol vehicle had been instructed to monitor areas surrounding the subdivision entrance because several residents had recently reported unfamiliar vehicles using the county road. The intention, he explained, had been to increase general awareness near the neighborhood rather than investigate any particular property. Rebecca immediately followed with another question that changed the tone of the meeting. She asked whether those written patrol instructions specifically authorized repeated observation of privately owned land located outside the association boundaries. The supervisor quietly reviewed his own paperwork before admitting that no written instruction authorized routine observation of neighboring private property. The patrol route described the public roadway near the entrance, but did not direct personnel to stop repeatedly beside my fences or document activity occurring on land outside Willow Ridge. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully before comparing his route sheets with the timeline created from my synchronized camera recordings. Every repeated stop appeared exactly where the security logs became vague. One board member carefully overlaid the county parcel map onto an aerial image, while another compared the timestamps against the documented patrol schedule. The evidence fit together with remarkable consistency. Nobody questioned whether the recordings were authentic because the board had already confirmed the timestamps matched the original files. Instead, the discussion centered on procedure, boundaries, and whether existing security practices had gradually expanded beyond their intended purpose without anyone recognizing it. The room remained calm throughout the entire conversation. There were no raised voices, no accusations, and no dramatic confrontations. Only documents moved across the conference table as each person quietly followed the same chain of evidence. After nearly an hour, Rebecca folded her hands and looked directly at me. She acknowledged that the board now understood my farm had never fallen under association authority and that repeated observation outside the subdivision had not been supported by the governing documents or verified operational procedures. She thanked me for presenting the information respectfully instead of allowing frustration to replace facts. I appreciated her willingness to review everything objectively because very few disagreements become easier once emotions take control. As I left the meeting, the autumn sunlight reflected across the polished windows of the community office, while the familiar county road stretched quietly toward my farm. For the first time since this unusual situation began, every independent review had reached the same conclusion. The cameras had recorded the events, the public records had defined the boundaries, and the evidence had quietly accomplished something arguments rarely can. It had allowed everyone to arrive at the same truth together. The following Monday morning, the farm felt exactly as it always had before the first security vehicle ever appeared outside my fence. Sunlight spread slowly across the pastures while the irrigation system quietly watered the eastern fields, and cattle moved toward the feeding area beneath a cloudless autumn sky. Yet inside the Willow Ridge community office, important changes were already taking place. Later that afternoon, Rebecca Collins called to let me know the board had completed its internal review and wanted me to receive a copy of the actions they had approved. When I arrived, she handed me a neatly organized packet containing the official meeting summary. The board had voted unanimously to revise the association security procedures, requiring every future patrol route to remain strictly within recorded community boundaries unless specifically requested by the appropriate public authorities. The revised procedures also required security personnel to receive updated boundary maps before beginning patrol assignments, so there would be no misunderstanding regarding neighboring private property. Rebecca explained that the association had also met with the contracted security company to review every patrol log covering the previous month. After comparing those records with the certified county plats and the synchronized camera timeline I had provided, both organizations agreed that the repeated observation of my farm had extended beyond the intended purpose of neighborhood patrols. She emphasized that the review had not been about assigning blame, but about correcting procedures before similar mistakes affected someone else. I appreciated that response because lasting solutions rarely come from embarrassment. They come from improving the process that allowed the problem to happen in the first place. Before leaving the office, Rebecca thanked me once again for presenting every concern through organized documentation rather than accusations. She admitted that the evidence had allowed the board to understand the situation much more clearly than assumptions ever could. During the following week, my security cameras continued recording exactly as they always had. The county road remained busy with ordinary traffic, including delivery trucks, farm equipment, school buses, and local residents traveling toward town. What never appeared again was the white Willow Ridge security vehicle stopping outside my fences. The camera timeline that had once contained repeated visits gradually filled with nothing more than ordinary daily activity. Deer crossed the northern pasture shortly after sunrise. Wild turkeys wandered through the western field during the afternoon. Tractors moved between equipment sheds, while seasonal workers harvested crops beneath clear blue skies. The unusual pattern that had first captured my attention simply disappeared. One evening, I opened the original spreadsheet documenting every visit and compared it with the most recent month of recordings. The contrast was remarkable. The organized sequence of repeated observations had ended completely after the board completed its review. I archived every document, every certified map, every photograph, every synchronized video file, and every meeting note into a single permanent folder before placing the binder inside my office cabinet. Looking across the peaceful fields through the open window, I realized the cameras had never created the truth. They had only preserved it long enough for everyone else to see it. The real resolution came because independent records, verified public documents, and respectful conversations all pointed toward the same conclusion without contradicting one another. As the evening sun settled behind the tree line and long shadows stretched across the quiet farm, I understood that good neighbors are not defined by the fences between their properties. They are defined by the respect they show for boundaries that were never theirs to cross in the first place. Several weeks passed, and life on the farm gradually returned to the familiar rhythm that had always made this place feel like home. Every morning began with the same quiet sounds of cattle moving across the pasture, the irrigation system starting before sunrise, and the gentle breeze carrying the scent of fresh grass through the open windows of my office. The security cameras continued recording every hour of every day, just as they always had, but reviewing the footage became wonderfully uneventful again. Delivery trucks arrived on schedule. Neighbors waved while driving along the county road. Wildlife wandered peacefully across the northern fields. The unusual pattern that had first captured my attention had disappeared completely. One afternoon, I received a brief letter from Rebecca Collins on behalf of the Willow Ridge Board. The message explained that the association had completed updated training for its contracted security personnel, distributed revised boundary maps, and adopted new procedures requiring every patrol assignment to remain strictly within recorded community limits unless officially requested by the appropriate public authority. She thanked me for approaching the situation with patience, professionalism, and documented facts instead of unnecessary confrontation. Reading those words, I realized that the outcome had become far more meaningful than simply ending a series of unwanted observations outside my fence. A process had improved, and that improvement would likely prevent similar misunderstandings from affecting neighboring property owners in the future. I placed the letter inside the same binder containing the synchronized camera timelines, certified parcel maps, weather records, GPS overlays, photographs, and county documents collected throughout the investigation. It belonged there because it completed the story just as clearly as every piece of evidence that came before it. Looking through those pages one final time, I noticed something interesting. No single document had resolved the situation by itself. The truth emerged because dozens of independent records quietly supported one another until every reasonable question had an equally reasonable answer. The cameras documented the visits. The GPS records confirmed the locations. The county plats established the boundaries. The public documents defined the association's authority. The security logs explained the patrol routes. Together, they formed a complete picture that required no exaggeration and no emotional argument. On a cool autumn evening, I walked toward the northern fence where everything had first begun. The wooden fence posts remained exactly where my grandfather had placed them decades earlier. The county road remained as ordinary as ever, carrying local traffic beneath rows of mature oak trees glowing with shades of gold and crimson. Standing there, I realized the fence had never truly been the boundary protecting my farm. The real boundary had always been the law, the public records, and the quiet discipline of allowing facts to speak before assumptions. Technology had not replaced common sense. It had simply preserved the truth long enough for everyone to recognize it. As the final sunlight disappeared beyond the western hills and the first evening stars appeared above the peaceful fields, I turned toward the farmhouse knowing that nothing about the land had changed during those weeks. The barns remained where they had always stood. The pastures stretched peacefully across the same rolling acres. The cameras continued their silent work without seeking attention. The only thing that had truly changed was a renewed understanding shared by everyone involved. Respect for property begins with respect for boundaries, and lasting justice is rarely loud. It is patient, carefully documented, quietly verified, and ultimately impossible to ignore once every fact finds its proper place.